start the recording. Okay, so this is how to write a strong application for the Community Ownership Fund, putting together your management case. We're focusing on the management case because the feedback we've had from the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities at the UK government, who do the assessments for this fund, is that that's the area where communities are most likely to be unsuccessful. That's where some of the applications they've received so far have been weakest. So we're concentrating on that today. We will talk a little bit about the strategic case, which is the other side of the application, but mostly it's going to be about how to put together that really strong management case. There's about 20 of us today, so we can be reasonably informal. If you've got questions as we go along, please do put them in the chat. There will be an opportunity at the end for a question and answer session and discussion as well. The format today is going to be, we're going to go through the bulk of the presentation in the first session, which should take about 45 minutes. We'll have a quick break for 10 minutes, and then we'll do the final bit of the presentation, about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then we'll hopefully leave plenty of time for that discussion and chat. We'll end the presentation and we'll just get everyone up on the screen and lots of opportunity to ask questions and do a bit of learning. The session is scheduled for about 2 hours, but the formal presentation part will take less than that. We're going to send around a recording of the session, and we'll also provide the slides as well, which have lots of useful links. So please don't feel you need to take any notes from the slides as well. Okay, let's just move on to the first slide. So what's the agenda for today? We're going to start with a quick recap of what the Community Ownership Fund actually is, the eligibility criteria, including changes that have taken place. We're going to look at what's available through the support program that I mentioned. We're going to have a quick look at the strategic case, and then we'll go through the 4 main elements of the management case and let you know what you need to include in your application, your supporting documents, and then we'll go into that Q&A session. Okay, so what is the Community Ownership Fund? It's a £150 million fund which exists to help communities across the UK take control of assets, amenities or facilities that are at risk of being lost without community intervention. So that's the main part of the fund. That's the main objective that the UK government are looking for with this fund. They want to prevent assets which would otherwise be lost to the community. And that can be from a number of different risks. It can be from things like the asset's going to be closed, it's going to be sold off and lost effectively to the community sector. It could be that it's neglected, it's become a bit derelict under its current ownership, which threatens it to be lost again. And then if it's, an asset you potentially already own and you want to renovate it, you can look at things like energy efficiency and whether that might threaten the kind of long-term sustainability, financial sustainability of what you're trying to do. So you've got an unsustainable current business model, therefore there's a potential for that asset to be lost to the community. That £150 million works out around about £3 to £4 million a year to Scotland. That's kind of a floor rather than a ceiling. So, if you can put in a good business case and show evidence the risks that are facing the asset, show how it could be lost to the community, then you can make a good case for accessing the fund. Some of the things it won't fund, just to be clear, it won't fund business debts, so they won't pay off any business debts. It won't fund any housing development, including social housing. However, if you've got a little bit of housing as part of your project where it's quite a small part of it, then that could potentially be fundable as well. So the kind of thing they're probably thinking about there is if you're trying to purchase a pub or a shop or something and there's a flat above it which actually generates a bit of income and contributes to saving that asset, which is actually the shop, which is important to the community, then okay, that might be possible, but it's not going to fund any specific housing development. It won't fund the cost of purchasing publicly owned assets, so nothing from the public sector in terms of them generating any kind of income from that. If you buy an asset from the public sector through community asset transfer and through using money from the land fund, then you can renovate that asset. But the key thing is that no money from the Community Ownership Fund can go directly to a public authority. So if you've already had funding from the Community Ownership Fund for an asset, you can't go back and apply for it again. So if you use the Community Ownership Fund to buy an asset, for example, and then you want to go back for some additional money to renovate the asset. That's not something you can do. You can, as an organisation, apply to the community ownership fund twice for different assets, but you would need to think about whether that would be something that they would be willing to fund, whether they'd be willing to fund one organisation doing two different things. It's possible, but I think you would need to think carefully about what was the priority there. It can also fund expansion or improvements to asset that's not at risk. So if you're doing a building extension, because it's nice to have, and it will help you expand your services, etc., you can't get community ownership funding for that. However, if that extension was essential for the sustainable business model, i.e. it was going to generate a significant amount of income, and you could say the rest of the asset would be at risk of being lost without that, then that is potentially something that could be funded. Oh, no, just skipped on there. So what's available? So generally speaking, up to £250,000 of capital funding, and that's to purchase the asset or to help pay for refurbishments. You can apply up to £2 million in exceptional cases. What they mean by exceptional cases is there'd be a more stringent assessment for a start, but you'd also need to demonstrate a significant impact from that in terms of the asset in the community. So what you're actually going to do, and it would have to be kind of broader than the immediate area. So really a proportionate approach. If you're going to generate a huge amount of impact, it's a very important asset for that community, then you can potentially apply for more than the £250,000, and how much you apply for and how much impact is linked together. There's a bit more information on that in the prospectus, and we can answer questions about that. But generally speaking, what they're looking for is up to £250,000. Most of the assets in Scotland so far have been at that level. The community ownership funds must be matched, so you need matched funding, up to 20% from alternative sources. That could be a wide range of sources. It can be trusts and foundations, it can be government funding, all sorts of things, but you do need to find at least 20% of match from alternative sources. And then there's up to £50,000 in revenue funding as well. That's 100% funded. You don't need any match for that. And that would be to fund kind of project development costs. It could be paying for a project manager to oversee a capital build project. It could be paying for some cash flow issues you might be having in the first year because the building's closed, for utilities, all that kind of thing. It's awarded at the same time as the main grant, the main capital grant. So it's not really for kind of early stage development type stuff. It's really for seeing the project over the line and delivering what it is you're going to deliver. Just a wee comparison here. Obviously, there's the Scottish Land Fund as well. And I just wanted to kind of highlight some kind of areas where the Scottish Land Fund and the Community Ownership Fund are different. They can work together quite nicely in tandem. So the Scottish Land Fund, which is a Scottish Government fund, only funds geographic communities. So what they're looking for is organisations like development trusts and things like that, which are place-based, whereas the Community Ownership Fund will fund what are called communities of interest. So those would be things like sports clubs, arts organisations, heritage organisations, etc. Scottish Land Fund is really about acquiring assets. That's all they'll fund. They're looking for communities who want to take land and buildings into community ownership, whereas the Community Ownership Fund will fund post-acquisition renovation, up to 80% of the capital costs. SLF provides early stage funding, development funding, which is really useful. That kind of Scottish Land Fund stage 1 can be really useful for groups to do feasibility studies to check whether the project's viable, to develop business plans. Whereas, as I was mentioning before, the Community Ownership Fund revenue funding is awarded at the same time as the full application. So it's more geared towards the kind of post-award support type activity. It's absolutely fine for you to use both these funds. So for example, a few organisations we work with have used the Scottish Land Fund to purchase an asset, and then the Community Ownership Fund to develop that asset. SLF can be used for match for the Community Ownership Fund, but you need to be really careful of your timings. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit as well. Really important thing, which I'm going to mention later, but I'm going to mention now as well, the Community Ownership Fund match spending can't be spent until your application is approved. So don't spend any of your match until your Community Ownership Fund application is approved. Okay, so what's the support program, DTAS? We started working on this at the beginning of this year, around about kind of February, March time. And it's basically a broad consortium across the UK led by locality, who are the kind of lead contractor. In Scotland, in addition to DTAS, you've got the Architecture Heritage Fund you can see there, and Plunkett as well, who do work on kind of pubs and community shops. Obviously, Architecture Heritage Fund are interested in the heritage asset. So there's a really good range of experience there from across that consortium to support community organisations with their applications. So how can we support people? So the main place to go is My Community. I'm guessing if you find your way to this webinar, you've probably done it through the My Community website. Lots of really useful resources on there. In addition to the webinars, you've got case studies, you've got frequently asked questions about the fund, there's instructional videos, all that kind of thing, as well as that advice service. So there's a kind of question service. You can put in queries into the advice service. If you're in Scotland, what will happen is that'll come to me and I'll get back to you, answer your query, or we can set up a meeting to discuss your project in a bit more detail as well. In addition to that kind of advice and those resources, there's what's called in-depth support packages. They're available to community organisations with the highest needs. So we're looking for groups in areas of deprivation or that have other specific community needs. And basically what that will do is we'll sit down with you, we'll do a session to look at your community ownership fund application and your business plan and see where the gaps are and where you could get a bit of additional support. We could potentially bring in a consultant as well to provide some of that support. There's also a small grants program available through this fund. So if you're eligible for the in-depth support, there's a sort of support grant which can be up to £10,000 for doing all sorts of kind of professional services. Could be getting an architect, could be getting some surveys done, all sorts of things through that program as well. So if you're interested in that, then just get in touch. Not going to go through these in any great detail, but just to highlight what the latest successful applicants in Scotland look like. Quite a broad range of organisations there, as you can see. Most of those being kind of post-acquisition renovation work on buildings. So you can see a broad range of kind of community halls, heritage assets, development trusts, and halls. So there's a good mix of organisations that have come through this, mostly renovation projects, as I mentioned, and we've got a full list of the others at the end of this presentation that have been awarded as well. We're expecting to hear within the next 3 or 4 weeks about the latest round of successful applicants in Scotland as well. So how do you apply to the Community Ownership Fund? First step is expression of interest. That is open at any time. You can go to the UK government website and you can complete an online form, and that basically checks your eligibility. You'll get, within 2 to 3 weeks, you'll get a notice back saying whether or not you've been successful, whether or not you've been eligible. And when you get that notice back, it gives you a unique application code for your full application as well. There's 4 funding rounds a year. There's one open at the moment. It's open until the 11th of October at 11:59 AM. Quite important to note that one. So it's not the usual kind of funding deadline, which we close at midnight. It closes at midday. So there's basically a 4-year. This one is open at the moment till 11th of October. So we expect another one kind of December into January time as well. So it's kind of open for 6 weeks, closed for 6 weeks a little bit. So plenty of opportunities to apply. If you've submitted an expression of interest, then you will get a new application code when each new window opens. So you only have to submit the expression of interest once, and then you can apply in any of these funding windows into the future. We've got a Word version of the Community Ownership Fund application, which is a really useful way to build up and develop your application form as you go. Because it's an online form for the full application, it's a little bit fiddly with the boxes, and you might want different people within your organization to work on it. So on the My Community website, it's just been updated, actually, the latest version of the form in Word. I would encourage everyone to download that and use that as your kind of working document. Then when you get ready to apply, you can just copy bits and paste bits out of that into your full application. If you don't complete and submit your application by the deadline, it gets lost, so it won't carry over into the next funding window. So again, another good reason for using that Word document. If you're unsuccessful in your application, you can reapply, that's no problem, and the programme is open until March 2025. So just some things to think about when you're working on your application. DLAC won't go back to you to any great extent during the assessment process. So there's a maximum of 30 minutes. If there's a query they have, they want clarification, that's all they can do. So really what you want to be sure about is your application's in really good shape before you submit it. There's only a very limited number of attachments that you can provide along with it. So it may be that you need to be a little bit clever about that when you're submitting your business plan. You might want to put any extra information you have on community consultation or letters of support or whatever that is into appendices in your business plan, because you won't have a lot of opportunities to submit attachments. Always refer to evidence if you've got examples, comparison, research. Explain your reasoning and be consistent. We're going to cover all this in a lot more detail later. The two elements of the application are the strategic case and the management case. We're concentrating on the management case, but again, we'll talk a little bit about the strategic case. And yeah, that link there to the assessment criteria and scoring matrix on the DLAC website sets out what is required in detail. That should be your most important document as you're thinking about your putting together your application form and your business plan. Use it as a checklist. It's very good for saying, what does a strong application look like and what you need in terms of that. So if you're going through your business plan, your application, and you don't think you've got those things, refer back to this assessment criteria. We've used that assessment criteria as the basis for these slides, but again, strongly encourage you to download and have that document next year when you're completing all your work. Projects can't be changed after submission. So yeah, really important that you get everything you have into your existing application form. Any costs incurred before the deadline submitting application, the window will not be eligible. So yeah, don't spend your match. I think it's really critical. DLAC may take a legal charge on the building, so that depends on their assessment of what the risks are of your project. But basically, a legal charge means that they can, on the building, I think it's up to 7 years it can be on for. So you would want, when you're successful in your application, it's something you would discuss with your grant officer, but just be aware that that's something they might do. The community ownership fund is subject to procurement rules. So depending on how much you're spending as part of your COF project, you have to adhere to procurement rules. You have to have your project go out to tender, so you can't just award it to someone you like or someone you know. You have to have a proper exercise undertaken. And again, we'll get a bit more into that later. If your organization is subject to any legal action, or if any of your directors have been disqualified, then you need to notify them, and they will ask about that as well. So just be aware. Okay, so this is from the assessment criteria. This is how they score your application. So really useful to see the weighting that they give to the benefits and engagement section. So you can see within the strategic case, which is the first one we're going to look at, the benefits and engagement are the key things that they're looking for. That's not to say you would neglect environmental sustainability because it's not as heavily weighted. It's, you know, that score could be really helpful in making sure you've got a strong application. But I think you can see there where the priorities are. The benefits and engagement within the strategic case, the financial risks and forecasts within the management case are all weighted ×2. So it's also worth noting that you're required to score a combined minimum of 12 across sections, okay, in the management case. So if you don't score highly in that, your application will be unsuccessful regardless of how highly you score elsewhere. So again, really that's why we're focusing on the management case, because that's absolutely critical. Okay, so just looking briefly at the strategic case, because it is important. What we're going to look at here is the community use and engagement and local support. So that's the kind of key elements. So what they're really looking for here is, you know, what's the current use of the asset? What's uses it had in the past? And what effect would it have if this asset was lost to the community? Why is it really important that you're saving this building? What would happen without the intervention of your organization? And why can you kind of run it better if you're taking on something that has been run by the public sector or has been a private business? Why would it be better in community hands? On the engagement and local support side of things, really they're looking at community consultation. And I know a lot of you have done a lot of this, and you'll have good information on this. It's just about presenting that well within your application form and your business plan as well. And just, I would say, as a general kind of tip as well, don't rely on having something in your business plan and say, well, that's the business plan, so they should have seen that. as much as you can get into your actual application form, the better, because that's what the assessors are really going to be looking at. And that applies right across the management and strategic cases. So going back to your engagement in local support, can you demonstrate local support? And I think the crucial element here is showing how any kind of engagement or consultation work or work you've done with volunteers has fed into your plan. So how is that fed through the ideas that people have come up with, engagement you've done to gather feedback? How's that fed back into your proposals? How have you taken that on board and brought that into what you're planning to do as part of your whatever it is you're doing with the building? Yeah, just give details of local support, including your partners. So who are you working with? If you're working with the local authority or you're working with other partners within the third sector, just make sure you outline that as well. So the other bit of the strategic case is about benefits. So what community benefits will the project deliver? How will the planned activities deliver the benefits? How will they deliver a sustained benefit over time? And how will the whole community benefit? So I think that last one's particularly important if you're a community of interest. You know, you might be a football club or something like that who's got a very tight focus on delivering football. But I would imagine that as part of that, you do also lots of other things as well in the community. Do you sponsor events? How have you brought in the wider community to that discussion? And how will they be able to use the building or the pitch or the asset as well? What I really like with around benefits is to do what's called a theory of change. It doesn't have to be, it sounds quite complicated, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It can just be a simple table which shows how the inputs, i.e. funding from the UK government, your volunteer effort, work through to the activities you're going to deliver, the outcomes you're going to deliver, and the impact. Again, it's about showing that clear line from if we save this building, then there will be this types of activity take place, and this will be the impact in the community in terms of people's improvements to well-being and to health, social outcomes, all that kind of thing, and just making sure it's very clear how the building contributes to that. And then you're looking at the environmental sustainability. How does the project address environmental sustainability? So that could be in what you're doing. So it could be that you're doing stuff which is net zero or reducing carbon, that type of thing. But it could also be about how your project's progressing. So if you're renovating a building, has your architect looked at environmental sustainability as part of that? Are you going to use recycled materials? Is your building going to be upgraded to be more energy efficient? All that kind of thing. Okay, so moving on to talk about the management case. These are the four elements of the management case we're going to look at today. The funding breakdown, the financial risk and forecast, the resources and skills you'll need to deliver the project, and then the fourth one's representation, inclusiveness, and integration. These are all the key bits for the application form for the management case and the information you'll need. So for each of these sections, we're going to do it in 3 areas. We're going to look at, from the assessment criteria that I mentioned earlier that DLAC provide, what makes a strong application? What is it that they're looking for? We're going to look at the information that the assessors require. So what kind of supporting evidence and information do you need to back up your claims? And then the underlying information and documentation. So what would that look like? Is it a business plan? Is it a feasibility study? Is it architect's work, et cetera, et cetera? Just a few terms before we get started. There's a lot of jargon about, and just to clarify, so when we're talking about an asset, we're looking at property to be acquired and refurbished. So when we're talking about capital, so that's income and expenditure to buy the asset, or it could be to refurbish the asset. So that's what you need to do that. We're looking at revenue. It's the income and expenditure that you would need to run that asset. The contingency. So within a capital project, you would almost always have a contingency. That would be an amount which would be included to apply for any unexpected costs. So inflationary uplift would be part of that, or any other kind of unexpected costs which come along as part of your project. So the contingency would cover all that. And what I would say is make sure you put a reasonable contingency in. You know, and inflation is difficult at the moment, particularly for capital projects. As you will know, materials and costs of labor, etc., have gone up a fair amount. And I think in previous rounds, the UK government has been quite flexible on that to say, well, actually, you know, this is a really difficult situation. But I think now they're kind of saying, that a reasonable contingency should be accounted for. So it's okay to put in additional costs. I think that's quite a sensible and prudent thing to do, and shows you've thought about inflationary uplift and problems, etc. The cash flow, so that's about the total amount of money going into and out of your organization. How are you going to manage that, particularly through any difficult kind of capital project build phases? Are you going to have enough cash on hand at any point? So the liquidity is about the availability of the cash and the cash equivalents that you might have as well. So that's just some terms we're going to be using. So the funding breakdown, this is section 1 in the management case. What you need to do this is what you need to do for a strong application. You need to have cover the following areas. So we're going to look at acquiring the asset. So if you're buying a building or a piece of land through the community ownership fund, or you might be refurbishing the asset, and then there might be match funding that you need available. So you need to provide details of that. So acquiring the asset, you need to show that there is agreed sale price and transfer terms. So if you're buying a building from a private seller, you need to be able to show that there's agreement to purchase or acquire that asset, and there's a clear route to that. If the acquisition of the asset falls through, the COF grant is lost. You can't transfer the grant to another property. So you need to be really clear that you've got those things in place. Evaluation. So if you're buying a property, you need an independent valuation. It'll need to prove effectively to the UK government what the value of that property is, and it needs to be done within carried out within 6 months of your application. You need an agreement to sell and transfer in writing. So organisations, you can rely on verbal and implied agreement to transfer, etc., but you need to provide evidence of that. So they want a willing seller effectively, and they need to know that someone is willing to buy this asset. You need timescales to acquire. So if you're undertaking a community asset transfer process, for example, that can be slow, and there could be issues with planning, etc., etc. So you need to lay all that out and make sure that they are confident that you have a plan in place. None of these things are easy, and I don't think they expect it to be easy. You just need to show that you've kind of thought about the timescales, thought about how the community ownership fund is going to fit in. And then any other issues which might affect your ability to acquire the asset, where there might be title conditions attached to them, those type of things. Again, it's just making them aware that you're live to these issues. If you're refurbishing the asset, so you're effectively applying to COF to do up or renovate the building, you should know what the building work is needed for the building to be fit for purpose. The assessor really wants to know that you understand that the condition of the building is and what's needed to make it fit for a purpose, and that the funding is adequate to complete the work. You're not going to run out of funding before the building work is completed and they've ended up pouring a lot of money into a building which is fundamentally not finished. You need to provide a detailed breakdown of the work and the costings, and that needs to be in as much detail as you can. Should be backed up really by professional advice. So if you've got figures from an architect, from a quantity surveyor, then that's really what they're looking for. And again, that would all be kind of proportionate to the scale of the project and the amount of money you're asking for and the level of the refurbishment work. Important details of the professional advice you've taken. So if you've consulted architects, quantity surveyors, if you've had experts in to look at asbestos, or if it's a historic building, bat surveys, all that kind of thing, just to outline what those have been, what the results of those, who you brought in, etc. And again, that just shows there's a firm grounding for the project and shows that you've thought about all the costs and all the problems that could be arising. The milestones for completing the building work. So COF has to be spent within 12 months of your application being awarded. So how are you going to fit all that in all your project into that 12 months? What's the timescales for your building works? If you're doing procurement, you need to factor that in as well. Do the building works need to be carried out in a particular order? How long will it take? What are those milestones? What are the big kind of things that need to take place, and when will they take place? And then you need to provide information on how the building work itself is going to be managed. So, who is going to be the project manager for it? Are you going to bring in a project manager to oversee that? Have you got the skills within the organization to do that? Are you going to buy them in? and contract them? And if so, are you using the revenue grant for that? And how is that all going to work in terms of that timescale? So looking at the breakdown of the funding that you're going to ask for. So the capital funding request should really be broken down into the costs of the acquisition, the refurbishment, plus any contingency again, and I would say put in a reasonable contingency. The revenue funding request, it's got to be quite specific what you're looking for there. So if it is project management, what's that relating to? Is it for the building work? Is it kickstarting activity in the building? Is it doing some work to stimulate some activity in the community? Just be really clear with your revenue funding request about how you're going to spend it. What's your total request for funding from COF going to be? Capital plus revenue. Sounds straightforward, but you've got to be really clear on that. And yeah, what match funding is going to be required. If you've got the total cost of the project, yeah, and the match funding required, any funding you've got secured as well, you need to outline already. Useful to sort of make a table funding strategy to say, these are the funders we've approached, this is the total funding we need, and these are the ones that we're eligible for. These are the timescales for their application. So if you haven't secured all your match funding, you should be able to say at least, okay, well, we will know in October that a decision will be made on this match funding, just to give them, again, that confidence that there's a good sense that the money is coming. You don't need to have all your match completely secured, but just a good sense of when that's likely to take place. So this is, again, from the assessment criteria. This is from what makes a strong application to the community ownership fund. So again, full costings with clear explanation, no issues with eligibility, all the match is secured, but you don't necessarily have to have it. But if you have it secured, then that makes a very strong application. And again, it's about that clear route to securing the match. You need a clear project plan, setting out your milestones to spend within 12 months. So what you're going to do at various stages during that 12-month process, and a very clear outline of what your revenue is going to be spent on, and relating that into the business plan and the future of the asset. So moving on to talk about financial risks and forecasts. What you're really looking for here in terms of this section is completed their planned feasibility studies, any planned activities or services in the asset. So, what you're actually going to deliver from the asset, what are the kind of levels of activity going to be? So if you're going to deliver classes or you're going to deliver educational stuff, what does that look like? How many people are you going to support? You need your financial forecasts. So that'd be where's your income going to be generated from? So that could be a mix. It could be some self-generated income. It could be grants. It could be all sorts of things. But you just need to show that you've thought about that and you've got an evidence set of assumptions around that as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about your assumptions in a bit. You need to have an explanation of the use and need for COF revenue funding. So again, why do you need that funding? Why is it critical for the capital element to the project? So always link it into delivering what you're going to do. So if it's about supporting the transfer of the asset or if it's about supporting the refurbishment, how do those things tie in? You need to have your cash flow forecast, and you need risks and mitigations as well. So what are the big things which could threaten your project? What are the things you haven't thought you've thought about, but you don't know whether they're going to occur? So any kind of uncertainties are risks. What they want to know is that you've thought about the risks, you're aware of them, you're alive to them, and that you've thought about mitigating actions which can, either reduce the risk or prevent it from happening altogether, ideally. So normally that would present itself in something like a risk management table for the project specifically. So it could be things like, you aren't able to secure the rest of the match funding, or there's an internal problem with cash flow, et cetera, et cetera. So those could all be risks. And then you've thought about what the mitigating factors might be. So what's the kind of underpinning documentation that you need for this financial risk forecast? So you would want to provide revenue and capital budgets and a 5-year cash flow forecast. So quite often we see business plans that have got a 3-year cash flow forecast, but really what they're looking for is a 5-year extended cash flow forecast. And they need to be a combined cash flow forecast, so including elements of your revenue and your capital combined to show where that capital is going to come in, and to make sure that you are not going to be short of cash at any point in those processes, or that if you are going to be short of cash, then you're aware of that issue and you've taken steps to address it. You need to provide detailed assumptions for your income and expenditure. Next couple of slides are going to provide examples of what those assumptions might look like. You also need to include what's called a sensitivity analysis. So basically that's what would happen if your assumptions turn out to be incorrect, basically. So it could be your income is lower than you forecast, or it could be your costs are higher. How would that affect the overall business model? And that's really a key part of your kind of financial forecasting and a key part of your risk register as well, actually. So looking at what would happen if your scenarios are incorrect, what would the effect on the project be? And then you need to include your risk register. The guidance says it should be updated throughout the project, but it's good practice in project management anyway. And yeah, the risks are known and you're taking steps to deal with them. So that is, financial risks, risk of the building project, but also all the risks that come along with managing the building as well. The figures need explanations. So if you've done a feasibility study or you've researched on a specific income stream, then always refer to that in your business plan and ideally your application. You need to have a plan for operating the building. So if you've not run the building before, if you're moving into a new building, what's your operational plan? How are you going to staff it? What are the hours of those people going to be? What's going to happen if the alarm goes off at 2 o'clock in the morning, that kind of thing. So just to show again that you've thought about all the things which you're going to need to do when you take on that building. You're not kind of stepping into it a little bit blind. Talking about your customers, your markets, your competition. So, what market research have you done? How do you know who the competition is in the local area for their activities and services? Have you thought about your pricing structure? Again, all you're trying to do with this is show to the assessor that your revenue plans and your forecasts for your finances are realistic. You don't have to predict 100%, but they want to know that you've thought about them and they're kind of realistic and based on evidence. So we talked about assumptions, and this is just a kind of example of what you might put in terms of your assumptions around some of your income. So you can see community cafe there, room hire, managed workspace, a contract you might have, some fundraising. So basically what this is doing, every building or asset has a mix of kind of different types of revenue income. So as we mentioned, grants, could be trading income, contracts, fundraising, whatever that is. And this is an example of the kind of detail you'd be expected to include to show that you've thought where those figures are going to come from. So taking community cafe as an example, you're expecting to have 10 customers a day. What's their average spend expected to be? 20 days a month, etc., etc. That's going to rise over time as you build up the business. And again, it's just providing that level of detail to say, we've thought about this. We haven't just plucked a figure out of the air for what the community cafe is going to generate in terms of income. It's based on a realistic set of assumptions. So yeah, that was income assumptions. So this is cost assumptions, looking at caretaking, cleaning, utilities, your cafe supplies, your costs of staff, your event cost, etc. So if you're looking at caretaking, cleaning, you've averaged 15 hours a week at £10 an hour. And again, same thing. It's all about why have you made that assumption? Does it seem realistic? Is 15 hours a week a reasonable figure for that? £10 an hour a reasonable figure to employ someone on that basis? And that's the kind of detail they're looking for. Again, just to show the assessor who's looking at this, how you arrived at the cost you put in your figures. So again, from the assessment criteria, what makes a strong application when you're looking at financial and risk forecasts? You've got a really clear business plan. It's got detailed information on the financial sustainability. It's got details about any feasibility work that you had undertaken. The studies are extensive, they're realistic. There's a good set of clarity on risks and mitigations. You've got a clear financial and cash flow forecast with exhaustive details, so as much detail as you can provide. You've justified any revenue requested through the revenues application and any pre-acquisition revenue. and you've got really excellent detail on planned activities and services, so what you're going to actually deliver. So that's your kind of tick boxes. You know, when you're putting together your application and your business plan, you go through and say, okay, have we got this? Have we got real clarity on risks and mitigations? Could we be clear on our financial and cash flow forecasts? Okay, I think that's a lot of information. So what we're going to do is take a break for 10 minutes. That's the bulk of the presentation done. So if we're at 10:44, so if we come back at 10:55, I've got a little bit more presentation to do, maybe 10 minutes, and then that should give us plenty of time for questions and discussion. So if we come back, stay on the call, but just put your video off, and we'll come back at 10:55, and we'll start the second session.
The children I love, and a wonderful life, a wonderful partner, a wonderful daughter. There are still things that are.
Hi everyone, welcome back. Make that 10:55, so everyone's had a coffee and ready for the next section. Just a very short bit of the presentation now. That's the kind of meatier bit out of the way. We're going to talk about skills and resources now, which is this kind of second part of that kind of management case. So what are they looking for? Really, this section is about showing to the assessors in the UK government that you can deliver what you say you're going to deliver. So what we're looking at here is skills and resources within your organisation. If it's a building project, to manage that building project, to see it through. And then once that's complete, to manage the asset on an ongoing basis, particularly if you've not had a building before, you want to show that you've got the skills and the experience within your organization, you've got the track record to deliver what you say you're going to deliver. So any relevant kind of project management expertise you've got in your board or your staff team, or that you're going to draw on from advisors that you might have, is really important. You know, if your organization has managed a similar type of project, or you people within your board have got experience from their working lives of delivering similar kinds of projects, then really get that into the application form. Really do sell yourself in this section in terms of what you can do, the skills that you bring to the table. You really need to understand the roles that you are required to manage the asset as well. So, you know, who's going to not just do the project management, but who's going to work with other funders, who's going to do the marketing side of things, you know, who's going to run the asset, who's going to oversee it, who's going to be the manager, etc., etc. So just a good understanding of the roles that are required to manage that asset in the long term. You also need to ensure that if you outline your governance arrangements, your membership structures. I think that's particularly important if you've got anything slightly unusual going on there, whether you might have a trading subsidiary or something like that. Just be really clear about what that structure looks like, how your governance works, how your members feed in. If you've got a kind of two-tier democratic structure, how does that work? And again, it's all just about giving confidence that A, you can deliver the project, but also that you're well connected to your community as well, and that you're, you know, genuinely community led, and that they'll be involved in the process. Yeah, I think the key advice for me for this bit would be just to sell yourself. You know, get biographies of your different board members, of your staff members, and really highlight all the different experiences that they bring to the table when it comes to this project that are relevant. If you don't have a track record as an organization, which, you know, many people don't, again, it's about showing that the individuals who are involved in the project can bring that from, you know, their personal life, their work life, etc. And chances are you will have that within your board, within your wider membership, within your staff team, etc. So again, sell yourself and just outline what it is that you bring to the table. Give reassurance to the assessors that you can deliver what you say you're going to deliver, and on time and to a good standard. So what they're looking for, your governance board and structures, who's on your board, a list of your board members, what skills and experience they bring, is really important, as we've talked about, but it's also a bit about how decisions are made within your organization as well. So what's your decision-making process? Do you have delegated authority from board to staff members? What does that look like? Have you thought about that? And then it's about things like succession plans. So have you got a succession plan in place for your board members? If people have been on your board a long time and it might be that they're deciding to come to an end, what's your plan for bringing on new board members? And again, always back to showing that you're going to deliver, even if there's some potential changes coming up. Showing their board is effective and showing that even if there is some changes in the long term, this project is going to be sustainable. And then you need to look at your things like your recruitment plans and how you are as an employer, whether you've got the right HR policies in place, and you've got all the things you need, particularly if you're taking on a new asset, and that brings with it more responsibilities in that area. You're going to employ staff potentially for the first time, or employ more staff. How are you going to oversee that? Who's going to manage that process? Do you have all those policies in place? Do you have a staff handbook? All those types of things, all those HR things you need. And then you need to ensure all your submissions are up to date. So what you don't want is to be behind on your submissions to Oscar, the charity regulator, if you're a charity, or anything not up to date on Companies House. So just make sure all that is kind of in place in case someone goes and checks, to make sure. It's good practice, obviously, to have that anyway. But yeah, just a good kind of understanding that everything is as it should be. And then kind of looking at your paperwork and accounting. So what are your systems that you're going to use to oversee the projects and your activities? Have you got all the policies and procedures you need to run that building? We've got a facilities management service within DTAS. So if you're interested in accessing that and getting a bit of help with some of that type of information, then you can get in touch with myself and I'll put you in touch with Nick, who's our facilities management advisor, and we can give you some kind of ideas about running buildings, overseeing all the facilities management side of things. If you don't have those things in place because you're taking on a building for the first time, that's fine. But you just need to show within your application that you've got a clear path to doing that. You need to have these systems in place. You need to have these policies and procedures in place. And how are you going to get to that point? Your legal entity, submissions up to date. Your systems, your accounts. So how do you do your accounts? Is it a simple Excel bookkeeping type arrangement? Do you use Sage? The more kind of information you can give about what those processes look like, if you have a finance person on board, who your accountants are, again, always coming back to that idea, giving confidence to them that you're a robust organization, you're transparent, you're accountable, and you're going to be able to deliver what you say you're going to do, and you're going to manage the money effectively as well. So what makes a strong application from the skills and resources? Again, this is summarized from the assessment guidance. So really looking for a strong awareness of the management requirements of the project, what's required to oversee the project itself. You've got a good track record, proven skills in managing similar types of project, ideally at similar scale. Strong evidence of skills and experience in managing community projects of the type you're doing. Strong evidence of well-functioning governance structures. Effective decision-making succession plan. So that's, outlining what your governance structure is, what it looks like, what you have in place to make sure that you are accountable. You've got recruitment plans well progressed. So if you are taking on new people as part of this asset for the first time, have you thought about job descriptions? Have you thought about whether there's going to be potential recruitment issues in the area if you're in a small community? How are you going to manage all those things? And then a clear, consistent info on the makeup of your board, so who they are, how your decisions are made, and evidence that they function effectively. And then the kind of final section 4, within the management case, is about representation, inclusiveness, and integration. So really what they're looking for is once the asset is operational, and what you need is after the community ownership fund money is spent effectively, you need your asset to be operational relatively quickly. What are the views of the community and how have they been taken into account in running that asset? So I talked earlier about the community engagement side of things and having that kind of clear path from what the community was asking for and what you kind of delivered in terms of the asset. So again, this is about making sure that local community views are taken into account for the actual running of the asset itself, not just in the development of the project. How are people going to be actively involved in things and running it? And that could be through volunteers, it could be through engagement events that you're going to organize. Again, it's just demonstrating that deep connection to the community and that accountability as well. How will it be operated to be accessible to the whole of the community? So what's your kind of marketing strategy? How are you going to make sure you reach out to all the different aspects of your community and bring people in? And again, I think, you know, that's quite a key one if you're, particularly if you are a community of interest, have a focus on a particular thing, then really important to show that actually you're accessible to the whole of the community. And then inclusiveness and integration, what's required. So have you got a diversity, equality and inclusion policy? Do you understand what that means and what that relates to? Is it something that you're actively involved with, or have you just got a policy that sits in a shell? How have you used that diversity and inclusion policy and approach to be considered in your development of your plans? So really they want to understand how you're incorporating that into your work, but they also want to understand the membership structure. You know, is it open? Is it inclusive? And how might you help people overcome any kind of barriers to membership? Whether your board is representative of the local community. If it's not representative of the local community, then how are you accountable to that community? And what do you plan to do about that? So that can be challenging, I think, again, what they're looking for is that you're live to that issue and that you're taking active steps to engage with all areas of your community. Is there any barriers to inclusiveness? So, you know, opportunity to discuss what barriers have been considered, showing how you put that diversity, equality and inclusion policy into action within your community as well. And again, I know this isn't as heavily weighted as some of the other sections, but it's really important really important for your organization to do this generally, but also, you know, there is a scoring element to this as well. So do devote some time to this. So what they're looking for, information and evidence and accountability. So how are you accountable to the community? What are you doing to demonstrate and be transparent about what you're doing? Do you publish your minutes online? Do you show your accounts? Do you have them on your website? Do you inform the community regularly about what you're doing through newsletters, all that kind of thing. And then several examples of how the organization is rooted in the community. So again, showing that clear involvement directly in what you're doing, rather than just we consulted with people. How are they actively involved in your organization on a day-to-day basis? How the community will be involved in running the asset. Again, that's about volunteers coming in. It could be about all sorts of other things too. If you have a membership structure within your constitution or your articles with no barriers, so are you proactive in seeking new membership? Are you always trying to reach out to new people? How do you engage with your membership? Do you keep them informed about what you're doing? Is your AGM well attended? All that kind of thing is really goes to show that the community is generally positive and behind you in what you're doing. And the awareness of the need to be inclusive in delivery of project and use of the asset as well. So have you thought about that? Have you thought about marginalized, disadvantaged communities, people with protected characteristics, etc., and how are you going to reach out to them and make sure they're included in what you're doing? Okay, finally, just some kind of top tips from us in terms of your application. Key one there, do the research, make sure you can back up all the information you use. I think the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities is really strong on this. So it's not necessarily about you do need a strong, robust financial business model, but if what you present to them must be backed up with research. So you've got to have thought about the assumptions in those. You've got to thought about what happens if you don't actually meet your income target. So if you're stating that we will generate X, Y, and Z income from letting an office, say, for example, have you shown that that is based on a realistic assumption? Can you say, well, actually, there are similar offices within the area that rent at a similar rate? So it's all about that research. It's all about backing up any figures you use and just providing a justification for it. Providing explanations, yep. And I think this is a really critical one as well. The person who assesses your application may not know anything about your organization whatsoever. And the sector it operates in. So don't assume anything, don't assume any knowledge from their part, and really start from the beginning in terms of your vision, what it is you're trying to achieve, and work from there to make sure when you get that Word document for your application, read through the whole thing, get someone to read it who doesn't know your project that well, and they can point out anything what they don't understand that's inconsistent and say, well, I don't get why you do that better. why that works like that. So really important to have someone read it over from a kind of a perspective of not knowing anything about what you do, and they can point out anything they don't understand. And I think the broader point from that is get as much into your application form as possible, and make sure your application form reads consistently as well. You submit the business plan alongside, and that can be a reference point. You can refer to that specifically sections and say refer to this, but you've got to be really clear in your application form as well about what it is. Don't assume that the person who's assessing this will have read business plan cover to cover and will understand it for each section. The application form is the main part of what you're submitting and the main part of what you'll be assessed on. So really do concentrate on that. Okay, that's it from me in terms of the formal presentation. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to stop the recording